Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. The U.S. House of Representatives has decided to impeach President Donald Trump, calling him a threat to democracy. The Democrat-led House plans to introduce a charge of incitement of insurrection over Capitol Hill riots. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will call on Vice President Mike Pence today to wrest the powers of the presidency from Trump. Afghan leader Karim Khalili, along with a delegation, is arriving in Pakistan today on a three-day visit. The leader of the Hezb-e-Wahdat-e-Islami will call on Prime Minister Imran Khan and Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Islamabad says the visit is part of its policy to reach out to the Afghan political leadership to forge common understanding on the peace process. The United States says it will designate Yemen's Houthi group as a foreign terrorist organization on January 19th. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he also wants to designate Ansarullah leaders as global terrorists. He said the move will confront Ansarullah's terrorist activities in Yemen. The global number of coronavirus has surpassed 90 million with more than 1.93 million deaths. Japan has discovered a new variant of the new coronavirus in people arriving from Brazil. Meanwhile, China has reported 85 new locally transmitted cases of COVID-19, its biggest daily increase in more than 5 months. In Pakistan, over 1,800 cases and 32 fatalities were recorded overnight that pushed the death toll to 10,676. And in tennis, 8th-seeded Frances Tiafoe beats fellow American Bjorn Fratangelo 6-4, 3-6, 6-1 in the second round of Delray Beach Open. Tiafoe will now face the winner of the late match pitting British Cameron Norrie and third-seeded French Adrian Manarino. In another contest, fourth-seeded Polish Hubert Hurkacz comfortably downs Colombia's Daniel Elahi Galan 6-2, 6-2. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. We begin in the United States. The U.S. House of Representatives has decided to move to impeach President Donald Trump, calling him a threat to democracy. This comes after Wednesday's Capitol Hill storming by Trump supporters, which left 5 people dead. In a letter to her colleagues, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will call on Vice President Mike Pence to wrest the powers of the presidency from Donald Trump. If Pence does not respond, the Democrats will proceed with impeaching the president for a historic second time. The House plans to introduce a charge of incitement of insurrection over the riots, but no Republican senators have said they will vote to convict him of wrongdoing in the Senate. Now, the United States says it will designate Yemen's Houthi group as a foreign terrorist organization on the 19th of January. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the State Department will notify Congress of his intent. Pompeo said he also wants to designate 3 Ansarullah leaders as global terrorists. He said the move will confront Ansarullah's terrorist activities in Yemen. The Secretary of State said the U.S. is taking measures to reduce the impact of the move on humanitarian activities in the country. He said the U.S. Treasury Department will provide licenses for continuation of humanitarian activities in Yemen. Earlier, aid groups expressed concerns that the move can complicate efforts to combat the world's largest humanitarian crisis. And moving on, Karim Khalili, leader of Afghanistan's Hizb-e-Wahdat-e-Islami, is arriving in Pakistan today on a 3-day visit. Khalili will call on Prime Minister Imran Khan, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, and other dignitaries. Pakistan's Foreign Office says the visit is part of its policy to reach out to the Afghan political leadership to forge common understanding on the peace process. The visit coincides with the second round of the intra-Afghan talks between Kabul and the Taliban in Doha. The two sides are negotiating on the core agenda of the talks after agreeing on the mechanism and terms in round 1. Now, in occupied Kashmir, police say an army officer killed 3 Kashmiris in a fake encounter in Shopian last year to grab reward money of 2 million Indian rupees. In December, Captain Bhupinder and 2 of his associates were indicted for planting weapons on the bodies of the slain youth to brand them as terrorists. A police charge sheet said the 3 purposefully destroyed evidence of real crime that they have committed. The resulting embarrassment has forced India to consider court-martialing the army officer. Pakistan had earlier demanded an international probe into the killing of 3 Kashmiri laborers. Indian troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris in fake encounters since New Delhi revoked the occupied valley status in August last year. Also in India, the Supreme Court is set to hear petitions by the protesting farmers today amid a deadlock in talks with the center. The two sides are scheduled to hold their next meeting on the 15th of January. As the protest at Delhi border stretches into its second month, several dozen farmers have died of heart attacks and illnesses. 4 have committed suicide over laws that deregulate the buying and selling of agricultural goods. But Haryana Chief Minister Manohar Lal Khattar insists the center will not repeal the laws. Meanwhile, the farmers plan to hold a large demonstration on the 26th of January. In Nepal, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli says he will not rest until he retrieves Nepalese territories from India. This comes days before Nepali foreign minister's visit to India amid restrained bilateral ties. Kumar Gyawali will call on his Indian counterpart to resolve the long-term boundary dispute with talks. Prime Minister Oli said Gyawali will discuss the issue of the map that Kathmandu published last year. He said according to the Sugauli Treaty, Kalapani, Limpiadura and Lipu Lake belong to Nepal. The release of the map led to opposition from India, with the Ministry of External Affairs criticizing the move. And in Pakistan, 32 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This takes the country's death toll to 10,676. Health officials reported 1,877 new infections overnight. There are currently more than 35,000 active cases in the country. The Health Ministry says out of over 504,000 countrywide cases, more than 458,000 people have recovered. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health has started registering frontline healthcare workers who will receive the first doses of the vaccine. All staff of hospitals dealing with virus patients and healthcare workers appointed to inject vaccines will be immunized as a priority. And the global number of coronavirus has surpassed 90 million, with more than 1.93 million deaths. More on the pandemic in this report.
The optimism fueled by COVID-19 vaccines is dampened as the world witnesses an unprecedented surge in deaths and cases, while new variants of the virus causes worries. Japan has found coronavirus variant in people arriving from Brazil, which is different from the ones in Britain and South Africa. Meanwhile, French authorities are racing to contain the more infectious variant of COVID-19 first found in Britain after detecting it in the ports of Marseille and in the Alps. Mexico and Russia have also confirmed the new strain of the virus first detected in Britain. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the worsening state of global spread and new strands call for a more strengthened global health response.
While the need for international cooperation continues, we must expand our idea of what that means. In our interconnected world, we need a networked multilateralism so that global and regional organizations communicate and work together towards common goals.
Meanwhile, Indonesia has extended its ban on foreign arrivals for another 14 days in a bid to control the transmission of the coronavirus. Spain, too, is mulling new restrictions after it recorded its biggest one-day jump in coronavirus cases since October. Meanwhile, the US and Britain opened mass vaccination centers to boost immunization drive and deliver shots to all people.
We're 1A currently. However, Governor Cuomo just expanded the criteria to 1B, which will expand beyond healthcare providers starting this week. And we're excited and ready to provide vaccine to that group as well.
Over in Asia, mainland China has reported 85 new locally transmitted cases of COVID-19, its biggest daily increase in more than 5 months.
Moving on, Chinese state media has slammed U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's latest move on Taiwan. The backlash comes after the U.S. lifted restrictions on contacts between Washington and Taiwanese officials. In a commentary, state media said the U.S. move proves that it is only interested in ramping up confrontations. It said the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has crossed a dangerous red line with China. Earlier, Pompeo said the U.S.-Taiwan relationship will not be shackled by self-imposed restrictions. Taiwan is a sensitive issue for China, which considers the island a renegade province that must be brought under its rule. Now, Iran has asked South Korea to stop politicizing the seizure of its tanker by Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Earlier, Tehran denied allegations that the seizure of the tanker and its 20-member crew amounted to hostage-taking. State media said Tehran pressed Seoul to release $7 billion in funds frozen amid U.S. sanctions. Meanwhile, South Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-kun has arrived in Tehran for talks on the issue. Talking to Choi, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Seoul should make way for legal proceedings. Moving on, South Korea says it remains committed to engaging with North Korea. In his annual New Year's speech, President Moon Jae-in said Seoul's willingness to talks with Pyongyang remains unchanged. Moon said dialogue and co-prosperity were key drivers of the peace process on the Korean peninsula. He said cooperation on issues like the coronavirus pandemic can lead to breakthrough in stalled talks. Moon added he will make last-ditch efforts for a development in stalemated North Korea, U.S. and inter-Korean talks. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been elected as General Secretary of the ruling Workers' Party. Now, talks between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan to resolve the Nile Dam dispute have broken down again. Sudan expressed frustration after the latest round of virtual talks stalled. In a statement, Sudanese Irrigation Minister Yasser Abbas said the vicious cycle of talks cannot continue indefinitely. But Cairo and Addis Ababa blamed Khartoum's objections to the framework of the impasse. Ethiopian Foreign Ministry said Sudan objected to terms of reference by African Union experts. Meanwhile, African Union Chair Naledi Pandor voiced her regret that the talks had reached a dead end. Moving on, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, armed attackers have killed 6 guerrilla rangers and wounded several others in an ambush in eastern Virunga National Park. A spokesman of the park said the identity of the culprits was not yet clear, but said an armed group of men attacked their positions in the middle of the park. Over 200 rangers have been killed in the past, including 12 last April. Dozens of armed groups still operate in eastern Congo, with many remnants of militias that fought in civil wars. Now, in Ethiopia, the military says it has killed 15 members of Tigray's former ruling party and captured 8 others. According to state-run TV, those captured include the former president, Abe Weldu. It said the region's former deputy police commissioner is among those killed. The government declared victory in its conflict with the Tigray People's Liberation Front on the 28th of November after a month of fighting. But fugitive leaders of the TPLF had vowed to continue to fight from the mountains. Airstrikes and battles since early November in Tigray are believed to have killed thousands of people. Earlier, the UN said fighting is continuing in some parts, with over 2 million people in need of aid. And we'll be back with more news in detail after a short break. Stick around. We're back. Saudi Arabia has unveiled plans to build a zero-carbon city within the projected NEOM zone. It is the first major construction project for the $500 billion flagship business zone aimed at diversifying the economy. More on this development in this report.
There has been great interest around NEOM ever since its first announcement in 2017, with the mega development project being promoted as something straight out of science fiction. Based in northwestern Saudi Arabia, the zone is slated to be built from scratch on a 26,500 square kilometer area and link Jordan and Egypt via Saudi territory. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced the launch of a zero-carbon city called The Line in the zone. He says the city will extend over 170 kilometers and will be able to house 1 million residents. It will have facilities like schools, health centers, and green spaces.
Today, as the chairman of the board of directors of NEOM, I present to you The Line, 1 million people city with a length of 170 kilometers that preserves 95% of the nature within NEOM's land. Zero cars, zero streets, and zero carbon dioxide emission. One will be able to run their daily errands in just a 5 minutes walk, and one will be able to travel from the farthest point to the other in 20 minutes. With a 30% reduction in infrastructure cost, a 30% increase in the quality of product offered, and with 100% renewable energy.
An official says construction will start in the first quarter of 2021. A NEOM statement says the city is expected to contribute $48 billion to the kingdom's gross domestic product and create 380,000 jobs.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a heavy emotional and material toll, so a seamstress in Mexico is trying to fill in the void left by those who lost the fight against the virus. More in this report.
At her workshop in the northern border city of Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, Arendida Guerrero makes teddy bears for the family and friends of COVID-19 victims to console them. Each bear carries a message of love written on labels as a memory and addressed to the family members.
To people who have lost their family members to COVID, in this case, they bring the clothes of their loved ones which at one stage they used to wear the most, with what they were most remembered for, and then we make them this beautiful bear.
Guerrero started making the bears in March 2020. Araceli Ramirez, who recently lost her father to COVID-19, received her teddy bear made with material from a shirt used by her beloved father.
I think I will keep the teddy bear in my office, where I work, where I am most of the time, and I want him to be with me while I come to terms with this reality.
Residents in Ciudad Juarez on the border with Texas have lost thousands of loved ones due to the high rates of COVID-19. And officials say the real number of infected people and deaths is likely significantly higher than the official count due to little testing.
Moving on to business, stocks in the Asia Pacific are trading mixed as investors react to vaccine rollouts, new strains of COVID-19, and a surge in locally transmitted cases in China once again. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and the Topix Index have jumped over 2%. South Korean stocks are rising again on the back of big gains last week, with Seoul's Kospi gaining marginally. But mainland Chinese shares in Hong Kong's Hang Seng have slipped around 1.5%. Shares in Australia, too, have dipped, with the ASX 200 shedding almost 1%. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong has also slid fractionally. It's now time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.